to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Earl Wilson.
Here.
Mark Buckeye. Robbie Pratt.
Here.
Gina Bryant.
Here.
Barb Abishon. Gary Smith. So we have 3 of our members and our alderman rep not here. First is approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve.
One second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion carries. Approval of those minutes.
Do you need this? That's okay. Yeah, do you need this? Yeah. I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Public comment? Martin, you got anything?
I gave up my citizenship when I took this job.
All right. Old business, basically the things that we discussed last time, I listed there, the manufactured housing code, pre-HUD mobile home standards, and mobile home occupancy inspections, but I thought we'd go ahead and talk with our visitor and let him move on once we get any questions we want asked. Justin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, so on the phone, we have Mr. Justin Smith, who is the Manufactured Housing Program Manager for the State of Missouri Public Service Commission. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And I sent him some questions in advance, some things that we talked about last time, and I was going to ask him those, and then if you all have any questions, certainly feel free to ask. The first one I had, Justin, are there any codes or standards currently in place for pre-HUD mobile homes that they're held to?
Our department does not regularly use homes or pre-HUD homes, so as far as installation, there's nothing from our department. They were built to a certain standard that was in effect at the time they were built and approved at that time, so everything within the structure, within the wall cavities, was built to the standard that was in effect at the time they were built, and there's a HUD label, or there was a HUD label for anything post-76 verifying that it was built to the standard. The installation of the homes is up to the local authority having jurisdiction where the home is placed. In our eyes, we don't regulate the installation, and certain current standards can be applied. There's nothing stating that they have to, but for the most part, they can be, such as site drainage and a lot of things of that nature. But then there's others. The anchoring standards wouldn't really apply to roller homes simply because they're built differently. The I-beams supporting the homes are different thickness or different spacing. So we don't have anything, and kind of as I said, that's up to the local authority where the unit is placed in the United States.
So when you say, and I think we discussed this last time, that they were built to the standard then, most of that was the standard of like recreational vehicles, or I guess the American National Standards Institute?
Yeah, the ANSI code is typically what they were built to before 76, and then after 1976, the HUD manufactured standards were put into effect, and those have evolved over the years as well. So the HUD standards in 1976 are part of the as I know, was built to those standards and inspected and said to have met those standards. So similar to stick built, certain codes are in effect. There's nothing saying homes have been brought up to current standards. Obviously, any alteration you'd want to meet current standards. And again, certain things just aren't applicable depending on the age of the home.
Can you discuss any difference, or I guess major differences in codes for the mobile homes manufactured today versus pre-HUD?
This one I tried to answer the best I could, considering I've been with this for 5 years. I don't know the codes that were in effect. I see trends with looking at older homes, but HUD codes today, I'm sure for the most part, are performance-based codes. Those are different from your international building codes, your codes for modular or stick-built homes. These are performance-based, so the example, the unit must be able to travel. It doesn't say it has to be supported by this size I-beam. It just says this unit must be able to travel without deteriorating, prevent water infiltration, things like that. Pre-HUD homes were built to a different standard, like you mentioned before, the ANSI standard. I haven't seen or reviewed those codes enough to really be knowledgeable on them. As far as what I've seen, there's a lot of similarities, but there's obviously going to be differences. I don't really know those, having not dealt with those, or having not dealt with used or pre-HUD homes, in my experience.
Okay. Any general safety concerns to be aware of, or any experience there in these older versus newer homes?
Yes, safety concerns that we have our inspectors aware of. Installation is a big one. Installation standards, at least for Missouri, have, in the last 10 years even, come leaps and bounds. When you get under those older homes, the cement blocks that they're putting home can be resting on the ground. Currently, everything has to be on frost protected footings or concrete that's in the ground. Anchoring is another. The anchoring standards have come a long way. Before they used over the roof strapping, and considering these homes are 30, 40 years old, even if it was done, even if all of it was done immaculately, it's still 4 years old. So settling can occur, and shift or things like that. These homes can fall or deteriorate enough where that comes into question. Deteriorate building materials such as floors, walls, and ceilings. It may look fine from the outside, may feel fine until you step on the floor joist that's deteriorated, and then you're falling through a floor. Fire safety and hazardous materials. I don't typically see hazardous materials or asbestos. Building materials that have asbestos type qualities, but it doesn't mean they're not out there. Lead paint. I would say anyone going into a older home would, or use your older home, not disrupt or not, without being aware of what they're doing. Do your best not to disrupt anything. For all those reasons mentioned, materials and just the general installation of the home being in question.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one now that I've dug into this, but does the Public Service Commission perform free home inspections for consumers who file inspection requests with the commission?
Yes, we do. And I think the second part, our department performs inspections on new homes, the installation of the new homes, and that is currently on a 2-year window. So anything set within the previous 2 years, we will inspect. They can file a request for a formal inspection, or there's also informal. A phone call for a new home will suffice our requirement. We will have our inspectors from out there looking at the installation. If there are a serious safety concern, that doesn't have a date according to HUD, and that's to clarify, a safety concern as far as manufacturing. If there's something identified that is a result of manufacturing, that would go beyond the 2 years. Something that was overlooked, but for example, if a home with a gas furnace was built and the manufacturer did not exhaust that correctly, obviously that's something you find out sooner, quicker than later, unfortunately, but that's just an example. If something like that were discovered where it's an imminent safety hazard, that 2 years is out the window. Our typical order of operation is to report this to HUD, but if it's something more serious, we're the feet on the ground, we can intervene. But generally, it's a 2-year window for anything new and first-time installation.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few more questions, but do you guys have any questions? We're kind of halfway through the questions I had. Nope.
No?
Is a post-HUD mobile home required to have the National Manufactured Housing and Safety Standard metal seal affixed to it? And is that where the number is found on these, I guess, the VIN number, for lack of a better term?
And this question is, I'll try and answer it as best I can. The answer is not really clear or precise, but required, yes and no. Homes that are out there, and we see this daily, these units, or these seal or HUD labels get lost, siding gets damaged, gets replaced. They get lost throughout the year. There's nothing out there. We're not going to cite anyone for seeing a home without that, but if anyone wants to do anything with these homes, sell them, refinance, they will need and this is where, this is the Department of Revenue's term, but a VIN number to doing those things. And the VIN number is the Department of Revenue who issues these. They just use that vehicle identification number, but it's not for a vehicle. And we can use the HUD label or the serial number to identify this, and those numbers are linked. So if we have one, we can typically get the other, and I'm not sure which is more important to the Department of Revenue, but they typically, if we can get them, we'll ask for both. And the way I understand it, through the Department of Revenue, if they've never had a HUD label, they will issue one. So I think built prior to 1976, they will issue a VIN number to that, which is used for all your titling purposes or refinancing, as I mentioned. Anything built after 1976, which at one point had a HUD label, the Department of Revenue typically requires a court order or a judgment by a court to declare that they have to issue one. So it's the same end goal, but a little bit different process. If there's no label, one needs to be provided, and the Department of Revenue is one to provide that. There's just two processes, one for pre-HUD and one for post-HUD. And that number is used, like I said, for all your titling purposes. And when we perform those inspections for the Department of Revenue to verify either a home has it or does not.
So do you find them
Hopefully I
very?
made it clear.
Do you find those very often on these older homes when you're asked to?
I would say, and it's kind of streaky. You'll go months, or you go out, look at 10 homes, and you don't find one, and then you'll find 5 in a row. It's a little bit less than 40% of the time, but a fair amount of time we do find something, either a HUD label or a data plate or a stamp serial number.
And you were talking about this a little bit. If they being a tenant, wants to sell their trailer they own, or the owner wants the renter to purchase it, like on a lease to own, they should really have that number, should they not?
They should. And,
Okay.
they're going to get stopped somewhere in the process of selling and kind of realize that. Typically, I believe I'm not sure if it's part of the lender's process or somewhere along that line. They need that for the transaction. And ultimately, they need a title. And to obtain the title, you need the VIN number.
Okay. You've answered several of my other questions here in a row, but I was going to go in doing a little research. It appears that the Missouri Code of State Regulations were rescinded when it comes to used trailers this past year. Is that correct?
Yes, our codes were somewhat shifted. An extra chapter was added to house all the definitions. And some of those definitions were kept and shifted. Most of that chapter had been rescinded previously, except for a section saying that our department has the right to come onto a dealer's premises and inspect their records and books. That part was combined with another section saying any dealer, new or used, we can come on their property with proper notice and inspect their records and their books. As far as inspecting the unit itself, that's been rescinded for before I started here. I think that was the last major rule revision. Which I don't know the year, it might have been 2013 or 2011 on that.
Okay. Are you guys, do you get any calls, questions from other communities or tenants about issues with these pre-HUD trailers?
We will get questions, and kind of like we're doing here, we'll answer them the best we can and direct. If it's someone looking just to install a used home somewhere, we'll direct them. Here's how a new home is set up. Here's our general guidelines for home installation. This is not required by us, but if I was going to do it, here's how I would. But there's nothing dictating that or stating that these homes have to be set that way from our department. Again, it's up to the local authority whether they have requirements.
Okay. I'm hearing that fairly frequently. It's up to the local authority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The only question I have is, and this might be a DOR thing, are used mobile home sales tracked?
That would be a DOI thing. And I don't, as far as, I don't know if that'd be county by county or office by office. I'm not sure on that.
Okay. That are all the questions I have. Do you folks have any questions? Martin, anything?
Nope.
Nope. Justin, that's all we got.
Okay, well, if anything comes up or in the future, we're here in the resource to help us as best we can. So.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to speak with us.
Yep, no problem.
All right. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
So how are we going to use this information that we just received?
Well, I just wanted to get the answers from the powers that be to kind of reconfirm what we already thought, and that is that a lot of this lies with local authority, and there's not a whole lot of standards in place for pre-HUD mobile homes. There's, they don't come out and do inspections. They do on new homes within 2
When
years.
you say new homes, I'm not sure. Is he talking about
New
newly
modulars,
purchased
new
and
trailers.
homes or
Newly-
models that are, new homes that are approved for sale?
Newly sold homes that are placed on a lot,
They
they will
actually
come out and do it.
inspect them?
Well, first of all, they'll come out and inspect the anchoring if you want, because the anchoring agents are licensed through the state. That's a lot of what they deal with. And secondly, if you have what you would consider a manufacturer defect, not an issue with your landlord, they would come out and inspect it and then hold the manufacturer accountable if they did indeed.
How long have they been doing that, do you know?
That I don't know.
Because that's sold, I don't know, hundreds of mobile home lots, and arranged for the foundations for them, for dealers to come place them. I don't remember the Public Service Commission being involved in any of those. But there was a local authority who had relevant building codes and did the inspections, and maybe it's in jurisdictions where that's not being done,
That they fill the gap. Yeah.
Which would
So,
be
a lot of-
Genevieve County.
A lot of what I wanted to ask him was to reiterate some of the stuff that we've talked about, and the fact that we have a little bit of that gap here. Robbie was asking me earlier, and if you need copies of the ordinances, I sent them to you. They're collated, so if you want them, there's 4 or 5 pages in a row, and then it'd be a start over. Robbie was asking me earlier about the first one, which is the manufacturing housing code. You know, it doesn't tackle all the stuff. It just tackles what we talked about last time, anchoring and alterations and things like that. But I think it would fill a small gap for us as far as piers, anchoring, and things of that nature. And then the addition to the nuisance ordinance, which talks about pre-HUD mobile homes, would perhaps help us to better inspect these by holding them accountable to what was titled Exhibit A. So at this point, what I wanted to do was come out of this meeting with a recommendation from this board as to what you would like to recommend to the Board of Aldermen at some point. This document, I think, there's not much change can be done because this verbiage comes straight out of the International Building Code. It's just an additional section at the end that has to be adopted specifically. The other piece of it, the one that's titled Pre-HUD Mobile Homes, and then there's Exhibit A and B that goes with that. And then there's an actual inspection. Well, Exhibit B is the inspection. What I'd like is to get any feedback from you if you'd like to see any more changes, and then hold a landlord/tenant meeting with those who either live in these mobile homes or landlords, owners, get their feedback on this, and then come back to you guys perhaps in September. So like to get your thoughts on that, and if you say, you know what, not really necessary, that's fine too, and same with all of this. But there is a gap. When we go out to do an occupancy inspection on a trailer or a mobile home, there's only certain things that we can check for versus at a house. I'd like to be able to check for more of the structural issues. And we've made recommendations on some of these inspections that we've went out and say you can push the wall in, you know, and if you push hard enough, you could probably put your hand through the interior wall. And some landlords have been receptive to that, and they've made those repairs. But I'd just like to be able to say you need to make these repairs.
So if you went into a home to do an inspection and you could do that, then they would have to make those repairs on a home?
When you say a home, like a
Like a-
stick frame
yes.
brick house?
Yes.
Yes.
So how come we can't do that with trailers?
because there are no, like we've been discussing, there are no codes or standards for particularly these trailers, these pre-HUD standards. The ones that are post-HUD, it's in the Code of Federal Regulation, and there are some standards. The ones that are pre-HUD fall back to, he keeps calling it ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and you don't have to bring those up to code as they age, but they still need to be maintained at that level of code, and not all of them are.
Oh.
Our enforcement authority requires that an ordinance either include the standards or adopt a code that has the standards. And what I hear you saying is that our current code doesn't do that?
There's nothing in manufacturing housing, any of the code books that I've went through. This would help with that little bit of stuff I talked about earlier. And I'm saying what this would do, there's no code out there to adopt for what I want to do. This would hold these folks a little more accountable to make sure that their mobile homes meant the codes that we're putting in place, which are really just occupancy codes.
You really need the basic things for safety.
If you look at this Exhibit A, so it's called Standards Necessary to Exempt a Pre-HUD Mobile Home from the Provisions of this code, it would say mobile home meets the used mobile home occupancy inspection standards. So that's this document, which is really, if I gave you a copy of an actual occupancy inspection, this is just more specific and includes some structural issues. Now, when we go into a standard frame house or brick house, if there's a hole in the wall, we see it, but we don't go push on the walls, whereas in one of these mobile homes, that's something that needs to be done.
Some of those walls are just inch and a half studs.
Yes.
I had one of those on a lake lot, and I was putting some new windows in it, and I was just amazed,
There's not much there.
And it was about an inch of insulation.
Yes. And there should be, in some of these, insulation underneath with a vapor barrier, and I don't think that's there half the time either. I don't want to be crawling into trailers, but if it'll help, Mike and I would both probably figure out how to get it done.
Well, as I'm kind of reading through some of these things, there's a whole lot that I know in homes that I've gone into to see families that they've called me with issues that these are things that aren't done. Broken windows that are just duct taped or something along those lines. Water heaters falling through the floors or not functioning. Toilets falling through the floors. Heating and cooling systems not working properly, sinks just on bricks, the piping for sinks in the cabinets underneath, just stacked up on bricks to hold them in place because they're, so it's obviously those kind of things need to be checked into, but they'll just re-rent them and re-rent them and re-rent them and leave them like that in those kind of conditions.
Those floors are just particle board, and if they ever get wet, broken pipes, well, that just sawdust and glue.
There was that.
Dissolved.
It had been a cold winter and a bunch of the pipes broke and the landlord wouldn't fix them. And these people had no running water because of it. And they didn't know what they could do. But, like I said, I think they ended up leaving, but then he rented it out right away to someone else. So I'm like, how can he do that?
And we, just to kind of go over something we talked about earlier, we have now a way to catch that as long as they change the electric bill.
Right.
It used to be they didn't change the water bill.
Yeah.
So now we have partnered with Citizens, and if
Right.
the electric changes,
Right.
we go knocking on the door.
Right.
But this would, following section to add the following section to City Code 215, pre-HUD mobile homes. I reworded this. It's a little less onerous, I guess, than it was. It basically, it doesn't, and I want to be clear, this doesn't boot these trailers out of town, okay? It says, as of this ordinance, pre-HUD mobile homes shall not be permitted to come into the city and be installed for living units, storage, or otherwise, unless approved by the Board of Aldermen or the mobile home meets the standards in Exhibit A. and that any home which is currently installed and occupied is permitted to remain in its present location. It can't be relocated or installed on another parcel or have a change of occupant or owner unless the home meets Exhibit A. Okay, and Exhibit A basically says a city building inspector would need to verify that the mobile home meets an occupancy inspection, so this document. And then on the pre-HUD ones, that's what this is, Exhibit A is talking about, which mostly have the exterior access to the water heater furnace, that the walls of that would either need to be a half-inch thick or encased with metal on the outside. I'm really paraphrasing here, but you've got it in front of you. And that each room would have the proper egress, because not all of those have it. There either needs to be an exit door from each bedroom or a window that is at least 22 inches in dimension and 5 square feet and no more than 36 inches off the ground.
Good luck with that one.
I know. But my point here is not to go out and catch a bunch of trailers and boot people out. It's, oh my gosh, there's kids, people living in these trailers, and to keep them safe.
That's like
And
my biggest concern.
I would think the city, we would work with folks. If they came to me and said, you know, we will increase the size of the window, even though I think that's going to be difficult.
But it just doesn't cost too much.
Yeah.
They don't get enough
Well,
rent to do.
but East Missouri Action Agency does some weathering, re-weathering to the homes. And a lot of times, if it is on these older mobile homes, they do have to modify because of the windows that are available to put in that are insulated quality windows don't fit in the frames. So, I mean, if they're able to do that, then, so should landlords be
And
able
maybe
to.
these
Or
folks-
and they can actually, some of these people can apply for it as long as their landlord is
Yes,
okay with
that's
it. So, if that's the case, then that can be done, and I mean, it's feasible. It's not.
And we can certainly, just like, I'm going to talk about this before we leave, we can certainly put something like that into a pamphlet and say, you didn't pass the occupancy, but here's some resources for you. I don't want people booted out, but I don't want them living in unsafe structures either.
Yep.
So, but it's definitely a balancing act. I mean, you're going to have folks who are upset, but it's, in some cases, it's for their best.
So you got a meeting of mobile home
Owners and landlords.
owners and landlords, not tenants. How many do you think that is?
Not very many. I mean, you're familiar with that answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's only,
My fear is if you try and get a tenant meeting, you're really just opening up a can of worms for a gripe session you won't be able to control.
tenant or landlord?
Yeah, I know, I think either way.
Well,
Landlords, I think,
I
should
think
be-
both.
Yeah.
Before we adopt any standard
Absolutely.
that affects their investment, they should be consulted.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I think as usual, you'll have your handful of landlords who will be like completely on board with it because they want quality units to rent out and they want then quality tenants who take those. But then you'll have the ones who are like, well, you're, eating into my profit here, so.
Well, even my parents, all their properties that they rent out are immaculate, and even then, my mom even made a comment, well, I don't want the city telling me what to do with my house, and I'm like, but you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Don't you want, it would create a better market for them to get the amount of money they need to get from their houses when they're competing against other people that have good properties also. So if it would help everybody get better rent because they have a better quality product to offer.
Did she buy into that?
I don't know.
My goal here is safety. Safety from the tenant standpoint, and whether they want to swallow it down or not, safety from the landlord standpoint, because they could be held accountable if something happened to their tenants.
Yeah, for neglect.
Safety from the city standpoint, less stress on public services if there's not if one of these catches fire or something of that nature. And honestly, Robbie asked earlier about when this kind of came into fruition, and it was something that I saw right off the bat with mobile homes. And there isn't a whole lot to fall back on. And then there was an incident over the winter where we had to deem a structure uninhabitable, and the tenant had to move out. And that structure still hasn't been brought up to code. So, because it needs a lot of work. The water heater is falling in. I could put my foot through the floor. There was a broken window. There were pests inside. It was not livable.
That's gotta be bordering on the 180 days too, right? Getting close.
Well, this isn't,
I mean, it's not in, but if it was in,
yes.
getting
And
close to it.
the 180 days, just to be specific, that's on, you know, the designation of a pre-HUD mobile home as abandoned. There's a process there. It wouldn't just be somebody comes to me and says, hey, Jim moved out December 15th. There's a process to deem it abandoned, and they would go through that process. I would want, you know, in order for the city to be on solid ground, that to happen, they would have to, the real estate owner would file with the Department of Revenue to deem that abandoned, and it has to be three things. There has to be a reasonable knowledge from the real estate owner that the tenant left and no longer lives there. There has to be at least 30 days rent past due, and there has to be an effort on the part of the lot owner or the real estate owner to get that rent and no response. And then they can apply to deem it abandoned, and it would either be abandoned at that point, or if they get the abandonment deemed, they can then apply to take possession of it if they want. So there's a pretty solid process there. I just don't know, and that will lead me to this eventually, that all those folks who are living in those trailers understand that process, or even some of them that own them.
So, do we have any where the ownership of the land and the mobile home are separate? Somebody's just running the pad?
We know who owns the land, and as long as everyone's honest, we know the addresses of rental units and who owns those rental units. But as far as whether they're rented and who's inside them, because they don't have to come up and sign for water.
My question is whether the living unit is owned by someone separate from the real estate. We don't have a way, we don't have to track that.
We would know who owned it if it's a rental, but if it was somebody who owned it and they put it on an
And
existing
they're
pad.
paying $500 a month just for the pad.
And they're probably paying for the pad and their water, so they don't have to come down here and get water. We don't know who's living in there or who owns it. And that's one of the questions I asked him, is that tracked somewhere? Is there a list?
Yeah,
of
he said no.
He said no.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you can look up who owns a car, how come you can't do that with a trailer?
And they're kind of treated like cars.
Yeah.
You heard him talk about Department of Revenue, that they kind of have VIN numbers. But once they become immobile, which most are, then technically they're real estate, but
Well, no, not technically real estate.
Well-
Practically they're real estate.
practically they're real estate, but they're not taxed as real estate. So really, I mean, in
But
some instances, like if you go and you buy a new trailer up at Brof's in St. Charles, there's sales tax on that, because it's like you're buying a car. But
Yeah, and I've been through that process of an abandoned mobile home, and it is treated just like a car. It's the same process.
So,
Awesome.
questions? Would you suggest recommending this to the Board of Aldermen? Would you suggest recommending this to the Board of Aldermen?
I'm going to defer to the wisdom of the
I would
Yes.
say definitely yes.
Yeah.
Any little bit's gonna help, you know.
Yeah, I
To have
don't think there's
something.
anything there that's unreasonable.
No.
And especially like you said,
So,
you know,
we don't
things,
wanna-
the people that are in them and what they're doing.
I mean,
I
if you get
I would
a
suggest
kid
that,
that's trapped because they can't get out the window in a fire, you know, that, something like that would, you know, cause movement, but let's not do that.
Right.
Let's
you
be proactive.
you want to seek the input of the known owners of mobile home property
On this portion
before we
also?
submit it to the Board of Aldermen, or do you
Okay.
want to get the Board of
This to me
Aldermen
is like-
say, let's have a public hearing and
I mean, if
go for it.
this whole process is a house, this is like just the foundation, but I will certainly seek the input.
I think if it's vetted by the people who are likely to complain, it's kind of, I
Much
used to call
better.
it,
Okay.
it's called negotiated rulemaking. Before you propose a rule, have the negotiation, and that way, when you get there, you don't have to revisit it with people who object.
So we'll go that route with this one. Any questions, things you'd like to see changed on the other portion? So basically, the other portion being the addition of pre-HUD mobile homes to the nuisance section, and I'm not sure that that's the right section to put it in either. That's something I want to check with our city attorney. And then the addition of that leads to Exhibit B and A, which is basically an inspection of pre-HUD mobile homes, and then an inspection sheet, or an occupancy inspection for any mobile home. I also changed, if you see Exhibit A, we talked about last time, who would do these things and how long they would last. So I kind of added this upper portion would be the city inspector, and then the owner would be responsible for these other two things and presenting them to us, okay? Within a certain amount of time. And then if you look back, let's see here, on the pre-HUD mobile home, so the nuisance ordinance, it says that an existing would have to meet the standards set forth in Exhibit A or have met them within the past 12 months prior to any change of occupancy, owner, or use. In other words, if you come to me and we pass this and you go through these processes, that's good for a year. You don't have to do it again.
Yeah.
If you own the trailer and you want to re-rent it to someone else 6 months down the road. And again, I don't want it to be burdensome. I know it's going to appear to some to be that way, but
Especially starting off.
yes. And we're not, I want to be clear too, we're not going to go around and just do these inspections. These are going to occur when these situations occur. When it changes occupant, or changes owner, or changes use. Or someone wants to move one, but I
Yeah.
don't foresee that now.
Did we discuss last time about how many pre-HUD
We did.
trailers we do
I
have?
thought,
I tried to read back in the minutes.
Oh,
real
I just
quick.
talked to you about that, didn't I?
Well, yeah, we spoke about it briefly, and I think you,
I did. The mayor, I think, asked last time, or Gina, maybe you did, but I took it a little bit and walked up and down Grass and Morrow and all those streets over there, and then there's a few others. I did not go all over town, because there are a few spots around town where they're in residential areas, but I counted approximately 40. So there's a decent amount.
Yeah.
And that was just eyeballing it.
Yeah.
Okay, do they have an exterior door for the water heater? Are they're
Yeah, I
definitely
like,
single wide?
that they pointed that out, because I was like, oh, okay, that's how you find out. I think they're all over on across the street from my house.
Those are some. There's quite a few off of 61.
Oh.
I don't know if you're.
On Breeze
If you
Hill?
don't turn
Yes.
back, no,
Oh,
not
no.
Breeze Hill.
I was like, yeah. Are we? Yeah.
No, off of 61, kind of tucked in behind Doza Auto Body
Oh.
and along there.
Dundee
Yes.
Street.
That's mostly all trailers back there.
Yes. I actually lived back there when I first moved out.
I have friends who live back there, and the trailer was fine.
Yeah.
But
there's others.
but my landlord was my great uncle Alvin Combe, and he took care of all of his mobile homes. And as soon as you told him something was wrong, he right away went and had somebody come in and
But he
fix it.
sold those, didn't he?
He died, and so whenever he went into the nursing home, they sold off the majority of them.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, and now I think whoever took them over isn't doing quite so well with them. So
Which is really kind of sad, because, I mean, the amount of money they make off of these trailers is crazy. And to not go in and do a repair when it needs to be done, it's ridiculous.
now my aunt and uncle Jenny and Gary Foff, they have multiple mobile homes, and again Jenny is very much on top of all of that. But she also is very restrictive on who she rents to because she knows that it could be a lot of
Jenny is
expense.
down here more often than any other mobile home landlord, checking to make sure that she's doing things right.
Yep.
So
But she,
will-
like I said, she's also extremely selective in who she rents to.
Yeah. I talked to someone that came in for, applied for housing, and they were telling me about the trailer they're living in and all the problems it's having. And so she said, she was like, I gotta get out, I can't stay there any longer, I said, so I told her, I said, Okay, before you leave, the week before you leave, call the city and tell them you want to come in to do an occupancy permit. And then that way, the landlord can't rent it out to somebody else. But I was like, the week you leave, because you gotta do it if you're gonna leave.
Yeah, don't call us before you
Yeah,
want to leave.
Yeah,
Somebody's
exactly.
gotta pay for it.
Yeah,
Well, no,
yeah,
we might deem it uninhabitable and you'd have to leave.
yeah, exactly, but, ugh.
So I'll take these documents, unless you have suggestions to further amend them, forward to a landlord meeting that I will try to schedule next month, and then come back to you all in September. Does that make sense? Is this is the third Thursday. Is this suitable for everyone?
Yeah.
The only thing we're dealing with is municipal court is at 6 PM, so we have to wrap up, in an approximate hour and a half. We can't go longer than that. So, which kind of is a good thing.
Yeah.
But with me, it's sort of month
Month to month.
Yeah,
I understand.
I don't have anything set in stone.
I'll follow up with each of you then, maybe after the landlord meeting, and see if whatever that third Thursday in September will work. Okay?
Sometimes
Can we
that's bad
talk about
for-
this? We're gonna talk
That
about
third week is bad for me, I'm out of town, but I'm always usually here the first 2 weeks of the month.
Okay,
So we're going to include them on the schedule for the landlord meeting in case they want to.
absolutely. Yeah. The only other thing I have is, let me write down third Thursday real quick. Sorry, I wrote down a few more things. One of the suggestions last time, or a lot of the concerns, not only from some members here, but if you remember, Ann was in the audience, and she had a concern about who's buying these, and why would you buy this if it was in bad shape? And the suggestion was maybe we need to get some information out there. So this is an attempt to get some information out there. It's really just, the first page here is some things that all mobile homes, these are ordinances and regulations that are already in place. Just, hey, FYI, if you live or own a mobile home. These 2 pages are if you're buying a used mobile home or you're wanting to lease to own a mobile home. These are just some suggestions you might want to check into before you put your name on the dotted line. And then in these suggestions, it refers to some of the resources on the back. All I did was put the websites, but the real resource would be to either call the Public Service Commission, call City Hall, or call the Department of Revenue. And that's kind of what I would tell folks, but
So how would you disseminate this information?
I can get the addresses and send them
Addresses
out.
of people who are thinking about buying a mobile
No,
home?
sir, addresses of all the mobile homes in town. Or it wouldn't bother me one bit to just go hand them out. It wouldn't take
This
that
is
long.
addressed to people who are considering a purchase?
Yeah, but I can't know who
Living-
those are
yeah.
gonna
No, you
be.
can't.
So I would just hand them all to anyone living in a mobile home.
Yep,
Okay.
that sounds good.
There's an assumption that someone who's renting is,
Yeah,
next
but-
step is to purchase.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe they're in a.
Is there a better way to figure it out?
Yeah.
No, I don't know, that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. That's something I thought about, but I have no way of knowing who's considering purchasing a mobile home.
Or where do
And-
they go for information if they are going, where's the first place they go if they're going to buy a,
Well, in the one instance that I've heard about, they didn't go anywhere. Their landlord went to them and offered them a lease-to-own contract, but
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
sketchy.
yeah.
yeah.
That's what I was thinking, is like, most of that stuff's just kind of like done.
Yeah, you pay me
Well,
this much
yeah,
and
it's
it's
just
yours.
in conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And so,
Yeah.
and maybe it was a good deal, I don't know, no judgment, but, the person needs to know that now you're responsible for anything that's wrong with that trailer, and you're still gonna owe lot rent, water bill to the landlord. probably
Whatever they
for
wanna charge
eternity,
you.
Because
Yeah.
it's very doubtful that you're gonna move that trailer.
And
Most of
you
the
pay
ones that I've
personal
talked-
property tax on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is kind of the stuff that we brought up last time, but how do these people, how can we help them know more about that process? So.
This is
any-
good.
You could, it'd be, probably wouldn't help much, you could get them to real estate offices around, but doubt they're gonna.
And I will do that. To the few real estate agents that I talk with, or I can, come on in and grab one. But I will reach out to the folks that I know. But the example that I know didn't involve.
Well, I think it's like we just said, I think it's a lot of just conversation. Do you want to buy it?
Can I make an edit suggestion
Yes, you
for this,
can.
the resources?
Yes.
Can we put www dot in front of this? Because a lot of people that I've found that are in these type of situations, they're not very tech savvy, so that way it just kind of throws in front of them like, these our websites.
Yep. I can do that. That mobilehomeliving.org is a really good resource. So if you're out there listening, which I doubt that you are, but if you are, that's a really good resource to know how to check your trailer for issues and how to fix it if you can't afford to hire someone. Really good resource.
Awesome.
That's all I got, folks. You got anything for me? Any other rental issues besides what we've been talking about?
Nope.
Mobile Home Dealers Association would be aghast at us calling these units trailers.
They probably would, but they're not here today.
Yeah.
I try to say mobile homes, but you know what? When I was a kid, I lived in a trailer.
Awesome.
That's all I got, then.
Have you had any, talk at people with citizens giving you the report now that they think you don't know about it?
Just one.
Yeah?
And, we dealt with that. So, besides that, I think the initial, I don't want to call it shock, but the initial knowledge that now we know is out there. So, because we'll call, and some of them are great. They're great places. They just have either
They just don't want to deal with
through
it.
lack of knowledge or lack of desire, not gotten the inspections, but they do now.
Yeah, that's a success story.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed to adjourning?